Good evening. It is 7 p.m. We'll go ahead and call the Planning Commission meeting into session. We'll start with a roll call. Drew Folk.
Angie Harrison.
Kennedy Renner Singer. Colin Forsyth.
Allison Miller.
Ryan.
Excellent. We have two previous meeting minutes to review. So we have both January and February's to approve. Any comments around the meeting minutes that were forwarded by Lilith? All right, and entertain a motion to approve said minutes for January and February.
I move to approve the planning commission minutes from January 3rd and February 7th.
Good. Well, you
Did
got-
I
Can I
second?
get a second? Excellent. The first item on our agenda tonight is a public hearing for flood regulation amendments. So I will turn it over to Lilith to give us a summary of these amendments.
Thank you so much. The flood regulation amendments were initiated by the Department of Ecology, who randomly does a periodic review of every jurisdiction's flood regulations. This is different than the Shoreline Master Program regulations, although they run very much in tandem with each other. The majority of the amendments were required updates to match what changes have occurred in state law. By making these amendments now, it will save us time later during our mandatory update in 2026. There were a few items that were shown as recommended changes that staff felt were good suggestions, and we included those in the amendments. I think of these amendments as exempt from SEPA because they're procedural and the actual project itself will be reviewed at the time of development and determine if it needs SEPA or not. So with that, I reviewed it using the overall comprehensive plan amendment criteria, as our city code does not have any specific criteria for amending our development regulations. And therefore, some of those questions and answers you'll see are not applicable, but for consistency, I retained them in the staff report. With that, staff is recommending that you adopt these changes and the findings of facts and conclusions of law within the staff report. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Lilith. Quickly open it up for the commission. Do you have any comments? And we'll discuss this pretty at length, but any last minute comments from the commission? All right, so we are going to move this into the public comment session for this specific amendment. Before I open that up, I want to just read a quick little guideline. So first of all, welcome to our first public comment session for 2024. We will be holding 3 individual public comment sessions this evening. And they'll all follow the same format. First of all, I want to stress that we welcome the engagement of the community, providing their input during these sessions. It's critical to the process and ensures that your voice as a constituent is being heard. We do ask that comments, wherever possible, pertain to the specific code amendments affiliated with each public comment session. We ask each speaker provide their name and address before providing their comment. In the interest of privacy, you can also record this on the sign-in sheet should you wish to do so. Also, in the interest of preserving time for everyone to be heard, we will be limiting each speaker to 3 minutes. If an individual is speaking for a larger group of constituents, they will be allowed up to 5 minutes to speak on behalf of the group. Please note that there is a small change to our past process and that we will now we're now incorporating policy that we are not engaging in public dialogue during these public speaking sessions. This time is really dedicated to the public so that we have time for them to express their opinions. Planning Commission has already engaged in thorough discussion around these amendments prior to this session, so we'll refrain from engaging in open dialogue so not impede on the allocated time for these public speaking sessions. Where needed, the chair will provide clarification, but I'll make every attempt to reserve this time for the public to be heard. Again, this is only meant to ensure ample time for everyone to have an opportunity to speak and be heard. Lastly, I ask that we all be respectful of each other by assuming good intentions and acknowledging it is okay to disagree. I also ask that you please direct all comments to myself as the acting chair, and refrain from directing comments directly to any individual commissioners. With that being said, we'll officially open up the public comment session for the flood improvement amendments. Ladies and gentlemen, any comments?
Tyler is on the Zoom meeting. Anybody else on the Zoom meeting who would like to speak just needs to raise your hand, and then we can elevate you to a panelist so you can speak, and then return you back to the audience, so to speak, afterwards.
Let's give it another moment or two in case there's anyone online struggling to raise their hand. Well, last chance for public comment on the flood regulation amendments. All right, we'll officially close the public comment session for flood regulation amendments at 7:07. I would entertain a motion to approve said amendments.
Motion to approve, well, yeah, the amendments that have already been done for flood regulation amendments. There we go. I move to approve the flood regulation amendments as presented with the corresponding findings of fact and conclusions of law. I second.
Motion by Maggie.
Is there any more difficult?
All right, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda tonight, which is the.
Drew, I'll have you call for the vote.
So,
We will vote now, so all those in favor of approving the flood regulation amendments?
I,
Aye. And it is unanimous.
Yes, Brian and Allison both raise their hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila. All right, so the next item on the agenda is the code consistency amendments. Lilith, I'll hand it over to you for a summary.
Well, thank you so much. This group of amendments is meant to address primarily minor changes, code conflicts, or clarification of regulations based on how they're being implemented by staff or questions from the public. So the summary that is in the staff report notes, some duplication of codes, and so we'll be removing those. There's updates to the design review board. There's updates to Title 21, which is our development processing chapter. This one has that really nice update that we had talked about for allowing bed and breakfast to utilize the alley for their parking, which should save extra driveways and front yards. We also have adjustment for boundary line adjustments, which allows for non-conforming lot sizes to be acknowledged through a boundary line adjustment process. There's quite a few pages that relate to home occupations, but the primary change there is clarification of the code, allowing for a streamlined process for simple home businesses, Group A businesses, and just reformatting so that code flows better and addresses some of the staff processing concerns, particularly around the size of square footage of the proposed home occupation. We are also proposing a new chapter 1450. If you recall, when we reviewed it, this chapter will have fees, bonds, development agreements, and cost sharing. from other sections of the code, all brought into this new chapter. Again, trying to improve clarity and function. We are moving some bed and breakfast standards from the zoning code into the conditional use. With that move, we are saying that any bed and breakfast annexed into the city from the county, which are currently considered non-conforming uses, can retain their non-conforming status, but the code as it's drafted would change that to only allow them to be retained in non-conforming status for 5 years, at which time they will have had to convert to a bed and breakfast under the city regulations or cease all operations. So that should help everybody be under the same group of rules, and that will be nice. The city council did review that, and they had asked about maybe moving that to 3 years. One person did, but I still think 5 is a nice span of time to allow for any spots to open up should we be full at our maximum count of bed and breakfast, but also just time to make the change. And right now it's indefinite, so we're just adding a cap to their time frame. Other changes include removing the current 1416 chapter on residential design standards. Most of those standards are moving into the zoning supplementary regulations. Again, this is more about consistency, people being able to go to one location to understand all the design criteria. We also use this as a time to address some of the design criteria that we feel is outdated. And we also will be moving the manufactured home standards into the supplemental regulations. Other changes was removing the setback, particularly front yard setback in our commercial zones for public structures. And the goal there is to acknowledge that public structures next to the public right-of-way make sense, and they should be able to be built right up to the right-of-way. An example of that will be the Front Street Park restrooms or the Glacier parking lot restrooms. Both of those are closer than the current setback and are under variance review right now, with the hearing examiner hearing next month. Under chapter 1218, it's a new chapter, and this will outline a process primarily for public works to review and inspect new construction. So that's an important change. And then we'll be adding some references to the subdivision code for that, and adding a new chapter for traffic impact analysis requirements. There was a question of why we weren't codifying when the analysis has to take place, say a weekend versus a weekday. That's a policy-driven decision and best left in the comprehensive plan. And that was further verified with Public Works Director Tom Wacholder today, who restated that he finds the current setup, having the policy and the comprehensive plan and this new chapter, to be conducive for what he would like seen with the regulations. And then we didn't have a traffic impact analysis defined, so we added that. So those are the bulk of the changes. It does take up a lot of pages, but they're meant to improve the process and clarify the codes and address minor issues. Staff did the same review as the flood regulations using the comp plan criteria. Several of them are not applicable, but again, the primary basis is the code conflict clarification for the public. So we are requesting that the Planning Commission approve them as presented based on the findings and facts and conclusions of law within the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Lou. First turn it to the commission. Any comments on code consistency amendments?
No,
You go first, you started first?
no, I just had a question. I think it was on L. You mentioned hearing examiner or something going before the hearing examiner, and I didn't catch it. What?
Oh, well, the current projects are going to the hearing examiner because this code amendment isn't done.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So, well, I have a question, and it's might completely just be how I'm reading it, or there just might be a clearer way to do it. It's under the home occupations 18.36, and it's on page 33 of the agenda. And it's under Group A home occupation number 5. The area used for home occupation may be up to 100 square feet or not over 20% of the total floor area of the residence, whichever is greater.
Oh, you're probably right. It should probably say whichever is less. Although maybe not. Hold on, let me read it again. The area used for the home occupation may be up 100 square feet. Oh, I think the intent not over 20%, whichever is less.
Is it the
Maybe
10% is
20
square feet? Can it be that?
Yeah, I think the idea was like larger homes can do 20%, but we were having some people doing home ops in like an apartment where it's really small, so 20% was like, if you have a 300 square foot apartment, it's not very big.
So
So
I
we're saying it's a minimum 100. And
Yeah,
you
so
get at
that's
least
great.
100 regardless of what size
Okay,
structure you have, but you can go up to 20%.
okay, I just wanted to make sure, because it was
I think that was the
strangely worded.
intent.
Yeah, we could probably restate that before we send that to the city council.
Like, it may just be me, but I was like, I had to read it like 5 times and,
Mhm.
no.
Yeah, with all those new tiny apartments going in and people wanting to do a home office there, 20% was so tiny. It's like, no, they need to have a minimum
Yeah.
allowance.
Okay. Solid.
Yeah, so whichever is greater. It does meet the intent, but you have to know why to kind of read it correctly. So that'd be a good one to rewrite.
We'll make that recommendation, before we send that on. Any other comments from the commission? Okay, well, we're gonna formally open the public hearing session for code consistency amendments, 718. Open the floor to the public for any comments. Look away from.
If you've joined us by Zoom and would like to comment, please raise your hand.
Let's give it one more moment in case anyone online is trying to raise their hand. Last chance for public comment on code consistency amendments. We'll officially close the public comment session at 7:19. I would entertain a motion to approve. So I'll entertain a motion to approve the code consistency regulation amendments.
I move to approve the code consistency regulation amendments as presented in the staff report with the corresponding findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Second.
Seconded by-
That's fine.
All right, we'll take an official votes. All those in favor of co-consistency amendments, say aye.
I,
And it's unanimous with the ayes.
That's 100%. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the next topic tonight, which is the public hearing on cottage housing. So Lilith, I'll hand it back to you for a summary.
Thank you so much. I really want to start by thanking the Planning Commission for taking so many months talking this through. There has been a lot of good discussion and thoughtful dialogue about what should and shouldn't be in the cottage housing. And I do think that we've captured a fairly straightforward, but comprehensive review of key components to what cottage housing is. The intent with cottage housing is to provide a diverse type of housing. It may or may not result in quote unquote affordable housing, but it will provide a new type of housing in the city, which is a benefit to the community as a whole. Additionally, the concept of a cottage housing or smaller neighborhoods has historically been well received by the public at other meetings related to housing. So it's very nice to be at this point where we can move a code amendment through the process. So with that all said, I have reviewed the proposed amendment against the same criteria and would recommend that the Planning Commission adopt what you have presented based on the findings of facts and conclusions of law within the staff report.
Excellent. Thank you, Lilith. So I know we've spent the last few months kind of looking through this, but I want to give the commission one last chance. If there's any other thoughts or opinions or discussion points we want to address before we open this up for public comment. All right, so we will formally open the, yes, please.
just a quick question, Lilith. So, tiny homes defined as, you know, that can be on wheels, those are officially okay now? I didn't
Well,
remember.
they actually have to remove them and put them on a permanent foundation.
Okay.
For them to be placed in the city limits based on the building code. But the definition of a tiny home is typically, initially it's built on wheels and it's no larger than 400 square feet.
But it officially has to be taken off of the wheels.
If it's going to reside in the city limits, yes, it needs to be on a permanent foundation and be connected to city services.
Great, thank you.
Good question. Any other questions or comments from the commission? Okay, 7:24, we'll officially open the public hearing session or public comment session for cottage housing amendments. Anyone in person or if you're online, please raise your hand. I do want to bring to note that we did receive a comment via email from the Residents Coalition of Chelan County. And this has been shared with the Planning Commission, and we want to say thank you for your feedback and your comments.
And I also forwarded onto the Planning Commission comments from the fire district. I can use this time to let you know that the building department reviewed those comments. The discussion about the length of the driveway or the driveway size is already regulated in code, and the building separation sizes are also already regulated in code. The fire district did want to recommend potential for a fire sprinkler system for these units, which could still be considered and addressed, if not today by the planning commission, but certainly at a later date. If they meet all the other standards as a single family home that wouldn't require a fire sprinkler system, it would be hard to impose a fire sprinkler system on a cottage unit when they're meeting fire separation standards, access standards, and their small unit. But there was concern, that these small units have a quick burn time because of their size, and among other things, just getting access to them. So if the planning commission wants to discuss that, they can as well.
We'll offer one more time opportunity for the public to comment. One more moment for anyone online. Any comment from our students in the audience? All quiet. All right, we'll officially close the public comment session, 7:26 p.m. Before we move this to a motion, I do want to address that topic with the comments from the fire department. Any thoughts around that? Fire sprinkler or setback limitations or access limitations? My thinking is that a sprinkler system would be absolutely cost prohibitive for this. So I would strongly encourage to move away from that, and as long as they're meeting all the other building codes and just building setbacks, that would be ideal in my opinion.
My impression was that if they were meeting everything, which is, you still say they have to, then that wasn't a requirement. Did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, I think it was just a recommendation from the fire department level.
Yeah, the fire department, was thinking they would like to have that additional standard added. And so it would be above and beyond what a single family home or ADU would require.
I feel it's just counterintuitive to the concept in itself, so unless there's strong opinion, then I think we leave the proposal as is. Allison, Brian, any thoughts?
I think that Christian's response from the building department kind of answered the questions, that basically all of the concerns of the fire department are covered by the building code. So these kinds of structures, like, they have to have the separation between structures within the lot that you would have, the same 10 feet that you would have from two houses on a separate lot. And whether or not something like fire sprinklers is required is the same as for any other single family home, because they meet the same fire separation requirements as any other single family home. So I agree with keeping it as simple like we have it and not adding any additional standards, just knowing that they meet the standards of any other home in the district.
Perfect. All right, I think we are in agreement then. I will entertain a motion to approve said amendment.
Oh, it is, I did.
All right, I move to approve the Cottage housing amendments as presented in the staff report with the corresponding findings of fact and conclusions of law.
Second that motion. Seconded by Colin. All those in favor of said amendments, say aye.
Aye.
And I believe the ayes have it. Is there a nay? Brian, I think see if your hand's up or not.
Yeah, you're done.
Sorry, we didn't get that.
It is not up.
Look good. Can you give us a thumbs up or a thumbs down?
Can you hear me?
Yes, there we go, yeah.
Yeah, my hand is not up.
Okay, so negative. Okay, thank you, Brian.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we'll now move on to the next topic, which is inclusionary zoning. So Lilith, I'll hand it over to you if you'd like to kick this off.
Yes, I would. Okay, and I had drafted a little section on inclusionary zoning using our existing affordable housing chapter in Title 18. One of the things I wanted to ask the Planning Commission about is when we require inclusionary zoning, we choose a minimum. So for example, we've just adopted something that says that cottage housing is a minimum of 4 units by definition. Let's go back up there. Thank you for bearing with me. A group of shared dwelling units. Didn't we have a minimum of 4 in here, or am I thinking of an old standard? Oh, just as many as you can fit. We changed it. Okay. But with inclusionary zoning, it's very common for them to have a minimum. So you can build 10 units, but that 11th unit you're going to trigger, you need to be include some low income. So for the people participating who don't know all the definitions, we define affordable housing as any housing cost that is 30% of your income or less. That's considered affordable housing. And that housing cost includes your mortgage or rent, any taxes directly related to that, and it does include some utilities. But it doesn't always have to include utilities. It depends on how the jurisdiction defines it. It does not include internet or cable or your phone. Those aren't considered utilities for affordable purposes. But in any case, so 30% of your overall household income going towards your rent or mortgage. If you're at that level or spending less, that's considered affordable. Some people also call that approachable, or they use other terms, because a lot of times when you say affordable, people automatically think low income. And low income, is defined by each jurisdiction based on the overall income levels within that community. So for us, that is the Chelan-Douglas metropolitan region. And in my short time at the city of Leavenworth in particular, the last 5 years, that income level has risen dramatically, but that's been common across all jurisdictions. I believe it was approximately 50-some thousand when I started 5 years ago, and now it's 69,000. That's a big jump in a short period of time. But costs of everything have risen as well. Any case, you have a range of affordability. The city of Leavenworth has defined workforce housing as 80% or to 120% of the income level for our region. Now, that's just the income level. Then you take that and you take 30% of it to say that a house is something you can afford. That rent or that mortgage is what you can afford. So there's two things that you calculate or look at. Low income is typically considered between 50 and 80%. Then they have very low income, and then they have people who don't have income, essentially. So those ranges, and I know the Planning Commission's fairly savvy on that range of information as it's been presented before.
So do we refer to median income for Chelan County or specific to Leavenworth jurisdiction?
Well, it's Chelan Douglas Metropolitan. I mean, it's the two counties together. That is how the federal government views us, and HUD in particular, U.S. Department of Housing, is called HUD. Now the state, because they have adopted a bunch of new regulations which aren't fully in play yet, has decided that they will do a income level for each county, and that we may end up using that in the long term. But right now it's pretty much just the HUD numbers, and Upper Valley Mend uses that, and they publish that on their website, and we typically go to their website because it's really a nice little overview that they provide. But you can also look at HUD. In any case, we're not talking about inclusionary zoning for the lower incomes. At least the city council hasn't given me that direction at this time. If you as a planning commission would like to break it down and provide higher level of benefit to a property owner to provide even, lower income housing or fully subsidized housing, that's something we could talk about. What the city council has primarily focused on up to this point has been workforce housing, 80 to 120%. So that's one of the questions for the planning commission to consider, discuss, and maybe provide me some direction on. I'll turn it over to you, Drew, to lead part of that discussion if everybody feels comfortable with that topic at this time.
What's the baseline that jurisdictions do, right? You talked about having a minimum number of units, or how does that work?
Well, there aren't very many jurisdictions our size. I haven't found any that use inclusionary zoning. That's a slightly separate question. That's the next question. How many units do you want to, where do you want the cutoff before they have to provide affordable housing? And then, yeah, I think what type of affordable housing you're looking at too. So typically, you look at a city like Bellevue or larger cities where the cost of the land is so high and the size of the developments is so large that they can essentially absorb some of the loss over the full project, because there is a loss when they have to make a unit affordable. And it could be as little as 10 units, and then you have to do affordable number of units. And some of the jurisdictions have it divvied up based on zoning district too. So if you're in a certain location in the city, then maybe this is mandatory. And if you're in a different location, maybe it's a voluntary program. All the programs that I've seen include an option to do a pay in lieu of. So yeah, I'm going to do that 11th unit but I'm gonna pay the city X amount of dollars instead of providing that affordable unit. I talked with the city of Chelan quite a while back about their large project that they were going to be mandating affordable units on. And they had a buyout of, I think it was just under $3,000. But the director there told me that, that number was really difficult to get to, what per unit, what the buyout would be. And their development that was going in there was several hundred units. So, it was $1 or $2 million to buy out all the low income units that would have been required. But it's my understanding that that's exactly what the developer was going to do. The project hasn't moved forward at this time, so I can't tell you what's actually occurring or might occur. But it is common for a developer to buy out of the program because providing that unit as affordable requires a long-term commitment, and that will be another question for the Planning Commission. How long does it have to be retained as affordable? Is it 20 years? Is it 50 years? Is it in perpetuity? So the developer has a different cost associated with each of those items that may make it more appealing to them just to provide a payment to the city instead. And then the city uses those monies to actually construct and or buy and maintain or provide low-income housing in a different area. The city could, for our city, we don't have a housing program. So, long-term, that means we would be working with, say, Upper Valley Men. We have the Housing Advisory Board, and they are tasked with looking at what land to buy, how to increase number of units, working with developers who want to provide low-income housing. So we may be able to use some monies in that program without partnering with, say, a land trust or a housing organization of some kind to manage the properties or developments that would utilize this program.
Are we required to have that option, the buyback option or buyout option? Is that a requirement or?
I was trying to look for that and I didn't see, but it seems to me like it is. I mean, essentially you're saying do it or do nothing. So the buyout option makes the most sense. But I couldn't see that in the RCW. RCW allows for us to have this program, but there aren't a ton of guidelines that I located. Let me.
So Lilith, so example of Chelan, so the money that people are, paying to buy out, is that then, so then the city of Chelan is supposed to be committed to using that money to make some affordable housing?
That's correct. And they have a housing program. A few years back, they developed a whole, essentially an Upper Valley Men. They have a board, they manage projects, they develop land, and they have a fairly, it seems to me from the outside, they have a fairly decent budget to maintain that program long term.
So we would just bank that money until we decide what to do?
Well, that's another issue. Once you take money in lieu of, you have to have a program for holding it, but you can't hold it indefinitely. You have to spend it or return it. So that's typically how those programs work. Yeah, and one of the challenges that communities face, you don't have projects in queue and they can take so long as many government projects do, particularly housing related, then you run into potential of losing money that you might have thought you had.
So Project Men just got a big grant and bought all that Marson property for low-income housing. Does that mean they're set up to do it to where that'd be kind of a shortcut to say we'll give it to Project Men and then we do have a plan? Is that feasible?
Well, we'd still have to maybe go out for requests for qualifications or whatnot, but yeah, they are our local housing, and maybe that would be enough to just directly partner with them. The MEND program was initially developed as a land trust model. So they retained ownership of the land and they would sell the houses to low income individuals. It's set up in a fashion where those individuals can retain that home for their whole life, regardless of their income. So if they come in as low income and they move out of low income, they can still retain the house. And then when it gets sold, it sells to somebody else who's low income. So that was their initial model. With the Marson family purchase, they modified their whole program so that they could manage rentals, because that's 31 rental units. And so they had never worked under that model before, and so it required quite a shift for them. Depending on what we require, yes, it may work out to be the same. I'm gonna step away for just 1 second.
I got a couple of comments.
Yeah.
For the payout, I've read about this and most of it's negative. You know, like there's a reason all the developers do payout and it doesn't really get us where we want, you know, all of them, they got a lot on their plate. I would be willing to bet, and we can ask them probably. I'm sure they would be happy to talk with us about it, but there's limited staff, limited projects, you know, and I think the biggest issue is the timeline, right? Like, we have the option of getting stuff built sooner by the developer, or we can go through a convoluted process, may or may not get the same results. I'm fairly anti-payout, just based on my understanding. And the other thing, a more general comment about this process, and I think this came up when we talked with the city council at our joint meeting. I kind of think the best way to go through this is come up with all the language and leave out the exact numbers. And whether we come with it at the end, or, you know, I know the city council and the mayor put a lot of thought and time into this process already. I feel like whether they fill it in themselves or we kind of figure it out jointly, that seems like a better process, you know, instead of us sitting here for however long going back and forth about whether it's 10% or 12% or whatever, like maybe kind of ad lib style, we can come up with the language, the process, and leave those specifics maybe blank until at the end, whether that's just us or the city council. You know, I feel like they have real opinions on it, and it's up to them in the end anyway, so, you know, maybe we can make our case, but at least leave those numbers soft for the time being. I don't know, Will, if you caught that, or if you have any thoughts on, you know, basically leaving the exact numbers, at least till the end of the process, and maybe working with the city council on what their thoughts are too.
Yeah, the numbers are key to understanding the financial impact to the developer and whether or not that's even feasible. And the city council just last night requested again to discuss inclusionary zoning at their retreat next month. So I was slightly confused by that, because they gave it to you, the planning commission, and said high priority. So I haven't talked to the city administrator about that conflict as much as just to say, well, we can chat about it. And so I can ask them next month, but without an understanding of what your impacts are going to be to a developer when you say you have to provide one unit at 80% or less. Just one, let alone 10% of a project or 20% of a project, which some people have thrown out, which is super high number. Without that financial understanding, it's really a difficult conversation to have. I mean, you're essentially potentially just cutting off all development, saying we don't want to grow, we don't want you here. If and that is where we've been for the last 50 years, 60 years, where we had virtually no growth, and that hasn't helped us at our current situation. So I think the numbers are key. I think the planning commission needs to understand those numbers. I think you guys have the time to really dig into what those mean and how that impacts the community. And I think the city council doesn't have the time to fully understand the ramifications of that. So I do think the planning commission has the heavier lift with that, but it's probably the better place for the discussion.
So how do what resources, like, none of us are developers, we had a developer on the commission and we.
My question, we're gonna come to you next. My question, is that, have there been any specific requests from, Upper Valley Mend or from the Chelan, Housing Authority in terms of what they're trying to do, that maybe they were seeking guidance or seeking exceptions for the moment?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. You wanna try it one more time?
Any specific asks from Upper Valley Mend or Housing Authority to the city to date, for inclusionary housing or for any projects that they're potentially looking at in the future?
No, I don't think they haven't approached us on this topic at all. It doesn't matter to them. The Housing Authority develops projects independently of inclusionary zoning. The inclusionary zoning is just going to affect developers. The Housing Authority typically looks at even lower incomes. I think, like I had mentioned, the city council wants to use this inclusionary more for the workforce avenue. 1 second.
I have some comments. Are
Go
you
ahead.
still going, Lois? Did you have more?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I just had to adjust something. But in the Upper Valley Mend, they also historically built their own projects and managed them. Purchasing like the Marson projects, like I indicated, is a completely different and new avenue for them that they've made quite a few concessions for. But this inclusionary zoning wouldn't apply to them either. They would just be buying land and building based on their own old model, and 100% of their units would be affordable. Allison?
Yeah. I think, well, so Colin mentioned like not a fan of the buyout option, but Lois kind of mentioned if there's not a buyout option, then we may not get any takers. Like nobody, we might not get anyone building multifamily housing if there's no buyout option. It's unfortunate, but it's kind of the reality of the situation in a lot of cases. that people want to do a development that is all at one standard, one rate, like to have a development that's partially market rate and partially affordable or income controlled can be a little trickier, and that's why they would rather just like do something market rate and pay large sums of money. And then that money can be used towards something that is fully affordable instead of kind of a, I mean, yeah, it'd be ideal if everybody included some affordable housing in their market rate project, but it is very unfortunately hard to convince a developer to do that. And I think that working with MEND or the Housing Authority to use income gained from buyouts to build fully dedicated affordable housing as a separate project is probably easier. Like that's what's happened in Chelan. So I'd be curious in other smaller jurisdictions what ratios they're using, and I'm curious if it is generally just a flat percentage across the board, or if there's kind of a formula based on the size of the project. It's just a flat percentage normally.
Yeah, good point. We need to do a little more research on that, Allison. I do want to come back to it in person, and we do have some developers in the audience tonight, so I'd like to hear their opinions of what this looks like from a development standpoint.
So, I'm actively looking and trying to understand the market here from a development standpoint. And this strikes me in a lot of ways. So let's take this as an opinion, but I can also state some facts, having built on the other side in larger jurisdictions where they've implemented these. And the costs over there for the houses though are so much, there's so much more margin. Here, as I look at it, the costs they're like one spec builder is at 300 square foot. So that's 450,000 for like a 1,600 square foot house. And now you gotta buy the land. Okay, the land's not cheap here. And so what's going on is that you're all of a sudden at an $800,000 house. So we're having to now charge 900, $1 million, 1.2 to then get enough to give you 20,000 for your fund. And so you're driving away the middle housing, which is my focus. I'm trying to figure out, can you even build workforce housing here? And that's what I'm trying to come up with a way to do. That's my passion. And that's kind of what I did on the other side. And, but if you saddle on these requirements, the second thing is that we tend to see other people doing it. And we tend to think, well, we should do that. Inclusionary, right? You guys don't have the zoning in the land in the buildable area. You guys are gonna spend so much time for $10,000 and you're gonna penalize a builder. But there's just not enough, you can just, 2 minutes, it's like, okay, it's either that property, or that property. And then once they're built, all your work to put this infrastructure in place isn't gonna grow any faster. You know, I know you're supposed to be looking out long-term, but I've owned in this place for 20 years and I've seen long-term. And I moved in here and said, oh, I'll spec build right away. And I pretty soon learned why you don't spec build, you custom build, because you just don't know. The margins are so thin here. They really are. So now you're gonna make it harder by putting this burden on builders and developers to find even a better property when there's not that many to find. So just because Bellevue does it, Seattle does it, I challenge you to go to Chelan. If they have a successful model, implement it. I bet if you guys you're sharp, I can tell by listening. If you go there and you analyze what they've done, you'll find out that it's either not really working, not working well, or actually adversarial. to development, and especially to the development of workforce housing. It does promote higher end housing, and you can take a chunk out of that, the margins are more, but what did you get for it? You forced them to build higher end houses. So if that makes sense, that's kind of my take on it. It's like the city's not big enough for this.
I'm gonna pause really quick. I'm gonna let our student civil leaders leave for the evening.
We get a form
Well, only if they want to leave, Drew, maybe they want to hang out.
Oh, yeah.
It's just getting juicy here, so.
So, yeah, I think that's a great point. And our feeling is the only place I see where this is gonna make an effect is that it will start being able to do it in the UGA.
Yeah.
And even that is still limited. I mean,
It's residential. If you absorb UGA, you're just absorbing residential.
Right.
You're not gonna have a 30-unit buildable condo. You'd have to rezone the whole valley.
Yeah, so we do have some R16, and there is some in R24 that are in UGA, so there is potential for it, but it's to your point, I think. The work that we put into it versus the actual available lots today probably doesn't make sense. So, I mean,
But to be fair, we say that about everything we do,
this is true.
because the options for development are so limited.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Rick. What would be a better tool or incentive for you to build workforce housing? As a developer?
Lilith, I'm the one who's been emailing you. Now I know why you're not, you're busy. So thanks for the responses, but yeah, it would be, what I found is, it's unit lot subdivisions. And, I asked, trying to work with Lilith to explain why that's important, and I'm actually willing to go look at other codes, bring them in for Lilith to then go, but I also see you have so much on your plate. So let me know when your timing works, but I'm happy to, dive and do the work. And so for instance, when you've got larger lots here and also on the UGAs, when this city was successful at knocking my zone from 12,000 to 8,000 square feet, which I think is the right thing if you're in the UGA or if you're in other areas, well, that will create an opportunity for a unit lot subdivision. So the state has mandated, it's already law, that you allow unit lot subdivisions in single family zones. But my thing is that I think it's important that you think through how you're gonna allow that. And so you can, we're being recorded, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So I'm trying to think of how to simplify it then too. But anyways, you can, as things progress, I'd like to suggest some stuff, and I don't know if that will go well with the city, but I think you can create, like one lot, you can create 4 individual houses. It's not cottage housing, but you can unit lot them, the separations are there, and now everybody owns their house individually. And the way we live now, a lot of us don't need big yards. We would love that. And then it's how you allow, what your setbacks are, what your restrictions are. There's ways to enhance that. Like in Seattle, you've got a DADU, which is detached accessory dwelling unit, and it's limited to 1,000 square feet. But by the way, if you dig down 4 feet, it doesn't count. Here, it would count for your living space. And now you can have 2 bedrooms down there, and you can actually break them out. You can actually make it a separate unit. Or you can have 2 bedrooms, and now you can have 1 bedroom up top and the living level in between. You can have a family live in that space. Instead, the way it's limited right now, you kind of best get 2 bedrooms at best. And then that's only set up for, hopefully you don't have kids. Or if you do, well, it's very clear what's going on. So these are the types of things I wanted to try to help this city, because I think that's the best. And you really only have a chance to really create workforce housing, doing this. And then you can have like code, like, you guys are great. This area is really good at having, flexibility in for the city to grant flexibility, it could be saying, instead of your inclusionary, this could be inclusionary. You could say, if you grant this, you will agree to sell in this price range. Which would be, and so that's all worked up front. The city moves fast enough where you could understand that, okay, that's my financial risk. I got this. So here's my cost to buy, here's my cost to build, and I've got to have some inclusionary here. And yeah, I can meet that workforce housing requirement. You know, does that, am I making sense? Does it make sense to what I'm saying?
I mean,
Are
I've
you
never,
talking about deed restriction, essentially?
I wouldn't, it could, yeah, it would go on title.
is that a
It
one-time-
actually only on the first sale, so it wouldn't go on title. It would be just. You can work it out, how exactly to work it out, if it's a deed restriction or whatever, because then when you resell, right? You know, but, and can they buy it? And then what you want to do is prevent investors from buying it and not living here.
Right.
So the only restriction would be, it has to be somebody.
Owner occupied or something.
Owner occupied,
Can we require it?
and that's the stuff that, it's just suggestions, I don't know, I'm willing to
Yeah.
help. But I think you can, if the city gave you a code, like, you can put your exterior stairway out on the outside, won't count, you know, or something, you get some setback allowance, right? That could be the trade-off. And anyways, that's my suggestion on, the only way I can see. The other thing is Stratford, you guys have seen that townhome on Stratford?
Mhm.
Has everybody seen it?
Yeah.
How many think it's pretty? Okay. And
Do
my,
you mean Stafford?
yeah. Why, did you build that?
No, that's
It's-
in his neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when you allow unit lot subdivisions without foresight, unless you know it, that's what I'm here to try to prevent, is I saw that and I went, how did this ever happen? And, yeah, and it's totally legit, you know, based on code. But your city would turn into those, which I don't think would look pretty, but you can take that same lot size and with certain work, create 4 independent houses. Parking's gonna be a little bit of an issue, you know, those are things just working through. But because of the size of the house, you're creating workforce housing. It's not this mega house.
And that's where the city council went completely sideways yesterday and they said, no, you can't guarantee that that's gonna be workforce housing. So
There's-
you can't
there's-
say those two things. Just because it's smaller doesn't mean it's gonna be workforce. And we can't regulate who buys it. And yeah, we have a
We-
program now where you can work with the Upper Valley men and deed restrict essentially using their program. But the city has reviewed and doesn't want to be in the business of reviewing property sales. So we'd work with a program like Mend or something similar. The developer could work with them, and we already have a code that allows for you know, higher density and some bonuses if you are doing that type of development.
But that's low income, not workforce housing.
It
Men.
is, it's more, it's 80%.
Okay, that's workforce.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
I'll pull
We
it
as
up.
a,
percent of the
we-
county.
we as a planning commission, before I got here, passed the 0 setback rule that allowed that atrocity behind me to be built in the first place. So I have no, I think Pete's a smart guy. I have no idea how he's gonna get money out of that, but $1.5 million per side for something that the entire neighborhood is just aghast over. No family is gonna live in that. It's not low income, it's ugly, it's intrusive. But we allowed that to happen by passing that 0 setback. So I'd like to hear some feedback from you on how that would work for affordable or the housing that you were talking about. You could have put 4 houses on that. Yes, I agree.
Okay, so, when you allow unit lot subdivisions, which that developer is hoping and waiting for, I believe, then he'll finish the house, but he probably doesn't even know unit lots are being talked about, I don't know, but might now.
He was a long time planning commission.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So how you would have prevented that would be just not would be the structure width. That would be the law. You can't build one unit so big in a residential zone. That's a long structure.
We changed the height limit since that development was approved, so I don't think it's technically possible to do the exact same thing again.
Oh, good. So that's been fixed, maybe. The okay, news to me. But I'm trying to offer a solution, and the solution is that you can do those. I've seen them done where you do a house and an ADU attached, but the second entrance has to be around. And again, I said parking's gonna be the issue. If you have an alley, you can sort of work on that, but if you're off the street, like him, he's all parking lot up front and all that, and that's, you know.
And we're kind of getting into like design standards here, which is not the conversation.
True, but that can prevent what you want. So you might have to, as you look at unit lot subdivisions, you might want to look at those in light of design standards, so you can then make sure the city turns out the way you want it. Thank you.
I'll also go ahead, and then I'm gonna try to bring us back to the original topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was trying to get back to the original topic as well. Basically, like I agree that inclusionary zoning, like what we're talking about, if we say some percentage of any new development, any new multifamily development is required to be affordable, it is going to really put a damper on development. And on the one hand, you can say, well, it's only putting a damper on the construction of not affordable, really expensive homes, but we have talked at great length many times about how all housing is necessary. You have to have all sorts of housing, and you can't, and if we block housing in general, even without, it's not, we can't block housing essentially, even if we're still working on how to better encourage more affordable housing, lower cost housing. Like we can't stop. And also then we're going to spend a whole bunch of time potentially coming up with a rule that will apply to maybe 2 developments in all of Leavenworth, because because it should only apply to larger developments probably. I'm still totally open to the idea of applying it to larger developments, but that's only going to happen a few times, and then there's not going to be any large parcels of land that it would apply to anymore. So that's just things to consider about inclusionary zoning. And then the idea of deed restriction, essentially, like unit lot subdivision, and that's just kind of another way of increasing density, which we can talk about, and that's a whole other thing. But deed restriction it could be kind of an alternative to inclusionary zoning in terms of requiring affordability on a smaller scale instead of saying like X% of units in a large development. But again, that's kind of a separate topic that I think if we end up not going very far with inclusionary zoning, or it's kind of a limited topic, we could maybe segue into deed restrictions, because I think that is a really great option that we should talk about at some point.
I also think it sounds like the city council wants to talk about it again at their retreat, so I'd be curious to see where they're at with it. Rather than us spending lots of time right now,
Yeah.
they may wanna take it on themselves and knock themselves out with it.
They said, a year or two ago, they said they were gonna take it on themselves.
Right.
And then they.
And then they put it on their docket.
Yeah.
You're saying they put like deed restriction baback on there?
No, not you.
No.
No.
Inclusionary.
So. Maybe this is a question for the group and the audience, but at what scale?
Yeah, in my mind, it was only for larger developments and not for residential.
Yes, I agree. I think, do we even have an idea of just some other arbitrary number out there?
Being for the amount, if you're developing what amount has to be there,
Well, no, like how big of a development does it have to be for this to kick in?
like 4 units, 10 units, like that kind of thing, or?
Except I'd say like 60 units, 80 units, 100 units.
Well, I mean, yeah, we do have to kind of future-proof this a little bit.
There won't be many.
And some of the language that I'm seeing too is that you'd have to commit to the affordability for 50 years. So we need to be thinking.
Well, we don't have to
50
do that.
years.
The RCW, I was reading, the 50 years is all.
Yeah, this RCW talks about incentive programs being a minimum of 50 years. I know some of the older codes are,
RCW, and that was specifically for low income.
yes.
It was 50 years, and that for affordable housing, it didn't seem to have a limit, which I don't care.
I mean,
I'm fine with that.
Go to a lawyer, guys.
I mean, I guess part of the thing is that we're looking at what percentage we want. Then it might help us
Be able to figure out what number we're starting with.
So one of the things that I'm concerned about, and I'd love the council to figure out how they would address it, is if we do have a buyback option, or buyout option, whatever it's called, and we get $10,000 or $100,000 or what have you, who's going to manage that? What's the plan? What's the scope? Is the city? You know, a larger jurisdiction may have a housing authority, right? Or may have a department dedicated to this sort of thing, but are we creating?
Maggie will figure it out.
Show the spreadsheet.
Well, so
Are we?
we partner with Men and the Chelan, is it the Chelan or the Wenatchee Housing Authority?
I think
Yeah.
it's changed to Chelan Douglas Housing Authority.
Well, they already are they already own projects in town, like the affordable housing across the street from me is like owned by a regional housing authority, so I think we could like. partner.
To deal with it and the manpower.
I mean,
We need to talk to them before.
yeah, I mean, we're partnering with them on certain things, but are we going to partner with them
Do we give them carte blanche of all this money?
for every $10,000 or $20,000 or? I guess we don't have a system. It doesn't seem like we have a system in place to deal with the buyback or buyout.
Well, that
Contingency.
would all be part of the code amendment. I mean, it all need to be established together.
Okay,
So I'm gonna recommend we do this. I think we need to kick it back to city council to give us a little bit more direction. If they would like us to lead this discussion and own the proposal. Or if they would like to work on a proposal that they would then offer for us to go through the procedure. But then on top of that, ask them to specifically define the size and scope and provide a recommendation for a percentage.
Well, I can ask them those questions at the retreat, and it is interesting to me, and I might frame it in terms of, I've heard from several council members that they don't want to follow the model of larger cities for density. And yet now we're asking to follow a model from a larger city for inclusionary zoning. But that actually requires that highest density to function. So I'm gonna try and talk to them a little bit about the dichotomy of what they're doing or what they're suggesting too. So, we'll have those discussions, if I can. We'll see how the agenda continues to unfold. Okay. In the meantime, if you haven't looked at the RCW for incentive programs, I can resend that out again. And that might be good for Jessica, you're new. And James will be joining us next time. He'll be new, and oh my goodness, Angie, we're gonna miss you.
Oh, thanks. I'll zoom in and throw in some random comment every now and then.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll have to stay informed
Oh,
and
I don't mind this.
Not long enough.
Not like that.
I think we're going up, I think this is my 4th year.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, I started like literally as the pandemic started. The first meeting I came to was the first. Yeah.
Right.
Which was really hard as a new person. to
Right.
be like, I can't just turn to the person next to me and go, what are we talking about? Yeah. And then, you know, those first 2 years, we did double meetings.
yes, we
Right.
did.
Good old days.
Yeah. It's pretty much, oh, it's Wednesday night.
Okay, I think we are at a natural breaking point for the evening, so I do wanna, one more opportunity to open up the floor for comment from either commission or audience.
I
Excellent.
will also, I'll let the planning commission know that Pete Olson did submit, a request to change our regulations to allow for condominiumization, so that he can sell those units that he built on Stafford. And,
Sorry.
so that will be, moving through the planning commission. I wanted to combine it with the unit lot subdivision, because I think that actually the two together can function pretty well. People can have options to do condos or unit lot subdivisions. And the outcome's very much the same or similar. So to the extent that I can pull those together, that will be the bulk of the agenda, I think, for next month.
Yeah, that
I
would be, we could just do a quick recap of any insight we get from the council on the inclusionary zoning, but then, yeah, I agree that the bulk would be on condominium and unit lot subdivision. And barring any objections, I think combining those is the right way to go.
Yeah.
I was gonna, one suggestion I have though is if we could get some pretty clear definitions about, where they may overlap but also what the clear distinctions are between condominium and unit lot subdivision options, because I know they're similar and related, but I wanna make sure that we have a pretty clear understanding of what exactly we're discussing, because when we were setting on the docket, it seemed like they were used almost interchangeably, and now it seems like, maybe they're sisters, but, they're still their own individuals, I don't know.
Yeah, a unit lot development, or unit lot subdivision includes land with it. A condominium is just the building structure itself. They can condominiumize the parking that goes with it, so they can have common areas associated with them as well. But that's different, Allison.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I think we should definitely have a conversation about both and comparing them. And unit lot subdivision is great and has lots of, it seems like there are significant benefits of unit lot subdivision over condominiumization. However, I don't think allowing condos is a bad idea, like just because maybe unit lot subdivision is better and will take a little more effort to figure out how to make that allowed and make sure that it's regulated the way that we want. I feel like it wouldn't hurt to just allow condominiumization as an option in the meantime. Like, I don't think we necessarily need to like wait to allow condominiumization to also, until we also have like finalized what we want to see for unit lot subdivision, even though I think that ultimately unit lot subdivision is maybe a better solution in a lot of cases. But options, lots of options.
Good point. I think, yes, we should watch that and make sure that we're not holding up condominiums if we can push that forward while we're still sorting out lot subdivisions. So that is a good point. So thanks for bringing that.
Great points, guys. I feel comfortable with the next agenda and appreciate the discussion. And thank you for all the hearing items.
Absolutely. Yeah. Last chance for comments. We will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you, Lila.
Thank you all. Have a great night. Thank you, Angie.
Thanks.
Kind of the way you came in, the way it took a whole year to meet you. All right, take care, everybody.